Hello and welcome to the 51st State. Well, we have got a show for you tonight that I think you are going to be more than impressed as we continue to break big news around the world and provoke discussion in ways that many are not even thinking is possible. What am I talking about? This being the 51st State challenge, where we are here in Australia about the way we view the world from our perspective. Are we a servant to three masters, part of AUKUS, a king who's a globalist, and yet China is our biggest trading partner? So how do we rationalise that and get on with a world of making things better when we are under a climate change story that prevents us from getting ahead, when the price of energy prevents us from doing many things? And now we learned this week that in the Sydney City Council, they are now going to ban gas stoves from properties being built in the inner city because apparently it's bad for the environment. Well, there you go. Well, we're going to look beyond all of that on this show as we look to the very big picture. And two guests I have for you on tonight's show. One will be Victor Avila, who is a former ICE agent from the United States, former congressional candidate, and a man who was shot 3 times by the cartel and even lost his partner. And we're going to talk about all things immigration, the real crimes, human trafficking, etc. And we're going to dig deep with a man who has faced, well, he has faced the end and he's lived to tell the tale. And then we're going to head to Paris, and I'm going to interview one of the councillors from the National Council of Resistance of Iran. That is the NCRI-Iran.org. We're going to talk about the events that have unfolded in the Middle East, the ceasefire, what Iranian people really want, and will there be regime change, amongst many other separate ideas, and why it is that Iran is the world leader in executions and who is really being executed. What was the Obama deal really all about, and how can a whole people stand up in the world 21st century when all of us seem to be put down, ignored, and can't seem to make a difference? So can the Iranian people affect change to make their lives better? We're going to find out all about that as well. Don't go anywhere. We'll take our first break, and when we come back, Victor Avila will be on the other side as we commence episode 14 of the 51st State. And welcome back to the 51st State. My guest this segment is Victor Avila, who is an author of the book Agent Under Fire, A Murder and a Manifesto, concerning his 20 years of service with US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, that enforces federal laws governing border control, customs, trade, and immigration to ensure domestic security. He also served as an accredited diplomat and liaison to the aforementioned governments, conducting international complex criminal investigations in a wide range of violations such as narcotics trafficking, arms trafficking, human trafficking and smuggling, financial violations, commercial fraud and counter-terrorism. Whilst on official assignment in Mexico, Special Agent Avila suffered multiple gunshot wounds and survived a violent ambush by the Mexican Los Zetas drug cartel, where Special Agent Jaime Zapata tragically lost his life. It is my pleasure to introduce him to you now. Victor Avila, welcome to the 51st State.
Great to be with you, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for taking the time to be with me today. And your story is truly extraordinary in a moment where the United States is confused and somehow doesn't quite understand the nuance between what we've seen in terms of arrests, real crime, and many people screaming out that human trafficking is the scourge on the United States and the Western world. And here you are, having lived to tell the tale. When you reflect upon what happened to you and Jamie, how do you justify to yourself or feel? Because some people understand this concept known as survivor guilt. It must be very difficult to then realize that you have to reassess everything that was your life and what it became. How do you do that?
With a lot of patience, a lot of faith, a lot of family support. It wasn't easy. It was a traumatic event on February 15th of 2011, and had many dark years after that, struggling with exactly that, the survivor's guilt and other issues because of the traumatic event. Not just the physical wounds that I took 3 bullet wounds, but the psychological wounds, the that type of healing, which is sometimes a lot harder than the physical wounds. The physical wounds, it took me about 5 months to get back up and running, but it's the psychological aspect that stays with you. And then, why am I here? Why did I survive? Well, the answer was pretty simple. It was right in front of me all along. I'm a man of faith, and it was God that chose this path for me. And then, so I came to that realization, okay, that's great, but then what am I supposed to do? Because I was no longer going to be an agent. I knew that after a while. I was kind of the last one to find out that this was kind of the end of my career. And so then, maybe what's the reason to be here? Maybe it was just to see my kids grow up and help my wife raise our children, as simple as that. But I'm the kind of person that can't just be sitting on the couch. And so I became, a very advocate for border security, national security. I wrote this book. I go around the country speaking at groups, different police groups, military groups, private entities, speaking on that side of leadership, speaking on the side of, this title of agent under fire. It took a new meaning. That the more I spoke, it was kind of like people find themselves under fire in some aspect of their life, under fire at home, under fire in their marriage, under fire with their employer, under fire financially, so many different aspects. And so all I could tell you is that I am a testament that you can overcome, and you can learn to accept it, live with it, and move on. Nobody's asking anybody to forget these traumas. And by the way, these traumas could be different types of traumas. It could be a vehicle accident. It could be a surgery. It could be, in my case, a shooting in the line of duty. It could be anything that I stand in front of these crowds as an example that everything has a solution. And the reason why there's a solution, it's because we're alive.
It's impossible for people who haven't experienced it to understand that when you cross that scenario and you face and you stare death in the eye and work out, how do I reassess until it happens? And so it's incredibly important for people to listen to what you have said there, and to relate it back to the possibility and the blessing that they don't suffer such traumas. But we have a weird human condition that we must fall on our face in order to learn life's lessons. And it appears that you were handed an involuntary lesson, therefore, and have come out the other side to tell the tale and to be able to advance your life. You've gone on to stand for Congress, you become a diplomat, and you do these incredible things. And for the average person, it's kind of like overachievement, which is an odd term. But what is the point of life if you can't then go on and test yourself, expand, etc.? When you look at your wife and your kids and what they're doing, do you see them also realizing that life is finite, that you don't waste a moment anymore?
Oh, absolutely. My kids, I give them a lot of credit. They were young when this happened. And the one word that always comes to mind is resiliency. How resilient they were, how adaptive they were. My goodness, my wife and I are blessed with our daughter who is 25, our son who's 20 years old. They have overcome a lot. They went through their own trauma. They were extracted from the country of Mexico. They went through their own, they went to 9 different schools in 2.5 years, which is hard for anybody to do that. And so they had their own, I had to recognize that my wife and my kids and even my extended family, they went through their own scenario because of what happened to me and my job. And once you start bringing that together, now, one of the things that I did notice is that a lot of people, and you just said this, it's very hard for them to really, truly understand what I went through. My parents and others, there's very few people that know what I went through because it was very, very traumatic. It was a violent, bloody, horrific event that I wish upon no one. But it made me change. It changed me as a man. I'll tell you that, for a better person. I'm glad because of that. One of the things that I was always very conscious and very concerned about, things that I had no control of, or it's the small things. I worried about the small things. I do not anymore. I really focus on what I can have the energy to have an impact on. And one of the things with as an employment, as an agent, as a federal agent for the government, sometimes people think, well, you're not making a difference. I always approach my job with honor and with dignity, and I did as much as I could. And I wasn't a super agent, but I could tell you that I was a hardworking agent. I worked a lot, and because of that work, I neglected my family because this job has odd hours and odd travel and many different. You're not a banker, you're not a teacher. It's very different, and it does involve danger. It does involve horrific types of crime, especially being a subject matter expert in human trafficking investigations. I saw things that I wish no one would ever see. Some things I will never be able to describe in person. I will take those with me. But I wrote one in my book just to give an insight, a glimpse as to what federal agents and officers get to witness on a daily basis because of their job. And it's negative. It's a very negative job. I mean, we incarcerate people, we separate people. When they talk about separation of families, I've been separating families all my career. It's not a good thing, and it has nothing to do with immigration. It has to do with police work. When you take the bad person to jail and you separate them, and there's drugs involved, there's crime involved, and there's this poverty. There's a lot of things that I've seen in my career, and you try to glimpse at the positive of what you're doing amongst all that negativity. And I always try to do that. I always try to focus that at least I was trying to make a difference, especially when it came to rescuing children under human trafficking conditions. That was probably the best, way of kind of getting paid back for the efforts that I did. The drugs and all the other stuff, okay, that continues to happen over. But when it came to the human beings, it was really very impactful.
Now, many of us have been either made aware of the term human trafficking through detailed research. Some of us go back to 2015, 2016, myself personally, when we uncovered a character on a website called 4chan who identified him or herself as FBI Anon and was talking about the US election leading up to Donald Trump's first term. This person identified and said that you realize that the big crime here is human trafficking, dig, was to quote, and that's where most of us started to understand. That gave rise to Pizzagate, etc. Others have been educated through movies like Sicario, TV shows like Breaking Bad, perhaps Oil Man with Billy Bob Thornton, and of course the film Sound of Freedom. So depending on how you've arrived at this, and you've had a direct encounter, literally taking bullets from the Mexican drug cartel. To cut to the chase, for those that are watching along going, yeah. Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, are they identified as human traffickers?
Absolutely, no doubt. There shouldn't be a doubt. And I'm glad you brought that up because the term human trafficking has kind of become mainstream now. And I think that it's lost a little bit of what that definition of what actually that means. And you're talking about slavery. This is what you're talking about. You're talking about holding a person against their will and forcing them to do something that they don't want to do. And it's usually the two major trafficking offenses are the sex slave trade and forced labor. You don't hear a lot about the forced labor, but there's a lot of forced labor in Europe and the United States, sweatshops and stuff like that. But most of the cases that I work obviously were involving the involuntary servitude of the sex slave trade, prostitution, and involving children as well. And it's a dark underworld that we live in, that exists. And by the way, when I started years ago, I had no idea what human trafficking was. I started getting trained to know what it was and the difference between smuggling an individual into the country versus trafficking an individual, which is exploitation of that person. And I learned it. I became an expert in it and started doing the actual cases all over Mexico, Central America, and in the United States, New York, Dallas, Atlanta, Miami, where these people were first of all, these cartels were making a lot of money exploiting these individuals, so much more money that at one point it surpassed the drug trade. That's how much money human trafficking is involved here because of that one victim that keeps on giving and giving and giving. So the reason I was telling you earlier, I put an example in my book of a very horrific case that I worked in New York, but I put it on there because I want people to understand that you need to be aware that this exists, that we live amongst this, and it happens to be a crime that happens in plain sight. So you hear a lot about the tunnels and this. Well, that might be true as well, but the majority I can tell you, the majority of human trafficking cases were right there, right in front of us in our communities, whether it was forced labor at a restaurant or a sweatshop, or it was human sex slave trade from a neighbor, right there in high-end housing. It was very plain. It wasn't hidden at all, by the way. A lot of people think it's this underground that doesn't go seen. It does seem. And so all you have to do is pay a little bit of attention. And I think now it's become where people are paying attention, and then you lose a little bit of that meaning of what human trafficking actually is. So my purpose when I go talk to these police groups and do these trainings is to put them back in the reality of what the crime of human trafficking actually is, and what a person, a victim, actually is put through, which is horrible situations that right now is probably at the epitome of human trafficking in the United States, Texas being a hub where they bring thousands and thousands of victims into the United States. We saw the largest number of unaccompanied children come in the last 4 years under the Biden administration. They're lost. We don't know where they're at. We don't know if they're exploiting them or not. Obviously, there's some exploitation there because of some of the cases that we identified, but it's very difficult to see it happening in front of you and then not be able to do, work these cases. Now they're working them. Now they're starting to find some of these children around the country, but there's many, many, many out there.
With our limited time, Victor, I'm trying to incorporate two questions into one. If Joe Biden's administration opened the borders and allowed millions of people to cross in many different ways, and there were reports of people paying the cartel $10,000, for example, to be able to get across the border, if the same Biden administration is so pro-people and so progressive, why do they deny the existence of human trafficking such that it takes the Trump administration to bring it to the surface? It would imply that there is a clientele of people connected to the progressives that seem to want to participate with the clientele. And of course, when we focus on Sound of Freedom, we focus on the most sensationalized and of course the most egregious, which is the underage sex slavery industry, if you will. Where I'm trying to go is, and everyone's asking the same question, where is the Epstein client list? Why is it hidden? And the implication that we haven't seen it implies that people in power are on it and are lead consumers. That sounds sensational at an official level, but is that valid? And is there hope, therefore, if that is valid, that we will one day actually bring this to the surface? Because, Victor, the truth shall set us free.
That's the only way. And it tells you that maybe these people are complicit. That's why they won't release this information. And I really don't care who's on it. I really don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat or anything. I really don't care. I care about about saving these children and removing these people from society, because we can't. I don't care if they're a senator. I don't care if they have high-end posts or public trust positions that at this point, I think the American people deserve to be able to protect yourself. In the law enforcement world, we identify the bad person. And so we know who the bad person is. Here, they're living amongst us that we have no idea who they are. And some of them are on this list. Why don't we have that information? Give us the information so we can protect ourselves and we could protect our children. And it happens a lot. I think it happens a lot in Hollywood, and it happens in a lot of different work environments out there, especially in the U.S. A lot of coercion is involved in these sex cases. A lot of coercion. The young women are coerced into thinking that they're going to be something else, and they're not. A lot of the illegal alien women are brought into the United States with different coercion that they're going to work, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, and they end up in the sex slave trade. So I want that exposed. I want the sunlight to hit there so everyone could know, and then we can act accordingly. You know, it's like the more information you have, the better you make the decision. Well, one of the things that I advocate for now is have people pay a little bit of attention locally. I'm not telling you to know exactly what's going on in the federal government, but know exactly what's going on in your town. And that's how you get involved. I'm not saying you have to run for office, but just be aware, because as soon as you allow that awareness to come in, I know we're all busy and we have lives and kids are playing soccer and all these things are going on. And I get it, but you have to, I think as a citizen of this world, you have to take a pause, take in the information from wherever you take it, but make that sound decision, because once that information comes in, you'd be surprised how your decision making might change.
Now, one more question before we take a break, and we have to move on to other topics. But I'm trying to understand the psychology when you said Hollywood, and that implies the music industry, obviously positions of power. These people, particularly Hollywood, you know, you could argue that a Hollywood movie star could have anyone they wanted if they wanted to have, you know, a sexual gratification, for example. How do you explain the psychology of people in power who should know better, who are meant to know better, who are meant to serve, would even go anywhere near this situation, knowing, of course, that they are most likely to be caught in a honeypot trap where they are going to be compromised? How do they fall for it? And what is the psychology where they don't believe in egalitarianism, equality, that we're all equal in a country like the United States, like Australia? Australia's an egalitarian country. United States, all men are created equal. How do they behave like this?
I love this question, because we always wonder, well, how is it that the bad guy gets caught? There are these big drug lords and white collar crimes. How is it that they eventually start making these mistakes to be identified for law enforcement to identify them? It's because, and it has to do with it psychologically. I think these individuals, especially the ones that are having involved with sex with children, and they're evildoers, what I think they are. But I think they're clouded. They're not thinking. They're not rationally thinking like you and I are. First of all, they have a very different mindset than a normal person. I'm not saying that they're mentally unstable. Maybe they are, or they're not. I'm just saying that they do not think rationally, because of power, because of money, because of the atmosphere and environment that they live in. They think that they get away with doing things that a normal person can't do, and is illegal against the law. And so they get clouded and start making these decisions that put them in these situations where law enforcement can identify them. Look at the P. Diddy trial going on, and names that are coming up, and people running away from that. They don't want to be nowhere associated, even if they just went to a party and did nothing. But this is what these people get clouded, get caught up in the moments. And these moments could be years. It's not just one party. It could be years that you're involved in this subculture, just kind of like a drug addict. A drug addict falls into this a state of mind that they're just stuck there, and it's very difficult to rehabilitate them. The same thing happens with these sex offenders and these murderers and these criminals, that they get involved into these situations that they think that this is now normal. And when you start normalizing behavior like that, we have a big problem in our society. That's why we want the Epstein files released and the lists released, so we could know these people that you would be surprised that maybe we looked up to, that maybe we voted into office, that maybe we trusted, that they were at one point, or maybe still, in that state of mind. And that would just blow our minds as to how and why we put our trust in this person. So this is where we learn. Believe me, I saw so much that you would believe that. How in the world is this person, this school teacher, this scout leader, this people in positions of trust, law enforcement officials? Unfortunately, I took down 2 corrupt public officials in my career, that they get caught up with the power and the money, and then they think that they could do whatever they want, and so they need to be identified and rooted out from society.
It is the saddest story, but it takes heroes who don't wear capes, Victor, and proud to say that I know you now, and that we can have this conversation. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and continue the conversation. You're watching the 51st State. And welcome back to the 51st State. My guest this segment, Victor Avila. Victor, before the break, absolutely shocking realization of just how this scourge happens. But this is not limited to just this. We obviously seen the mass deportation plan, although it doesn't seem to be as much as Barack Obama, and the left want to ignore that. But one of the characters that's popped up is this fellow called Kilmer Garcia, who was sent to El Salvador, and the Democrats made a big fuss. We saw Pam Bondi issue indictments in his case, and they're quite severe. But now we've learned that a judge in the US has said that he must go free pending trial. Can you bring us up to date what's going on as we learn that ICE is considering detaining him again?
This case is just unbelievable to me because I did this in my career. I identified people like Garcia and arrested them and helped prosecute them and put them behind bars and then eventually deport them. It makes absolutely no sense. It's mind-boggling to me that an individual like this one, that is an MS-13 confirmed MS-13 terrorist. Remember, MS-13 is now a foreign terrorist organization. It was labeled that way, it was categorized that way, and designated that way by the president and the State Department of the United States, making the MS-13 just like ISIS. So let's just start there. Why is the left and the Democrats advocating for the release of a terrorist? Well, that's exactly what they've been doing. And they actually have gotten their way. So first we get him deported. He goes to El Salvador. Like you said, they make a big stink about it. They actually brought him back to the United States, and they were going to charge him. They brought him back to the US and charged him with human smuggling. Because if you recall, the people don't know, he actually was pulled over with a bunch of aliens. I forget the state. It might have been Kentucky or Nebraska, somewhere in the mid country there, the U.S. And they were going to charge him with that. That I did a lot too. That's alien smuggling all the way. And so you have that criminal precedence on him. Besides being a gang member, besides being a wife beater. I mean, this guy, on top of everything, Jason, he is illegally present in the United States, meaning he has absolutely no status to be here. He has no permission. No one gave him the permission, not the United States, not a petition from a family member, not a petition from an employer. The guy is illegally present here. Let's not forget that, because that alone should be enough. But it's not enough for the left. And now we actually have a judge, and I understand it was like a local municipal judge, by the way, that released them based on, while they pending the trial of the human smuggling case. I think ICE is waiting for this to blow over a little bit, and then they're going to go pick him up because he's still illegal. You cannot be on bond. Now, there's different. I'll take that back. There's certain ways of being on bond. There's a criminal case that he has that obviously they released him on bond. There is an immigration court that could put you on bond. Obviously, he's not going through the immigration court, so he's not eligible to be put on bond or on an electrical bracelet on his leg, and electronic monitoring. That's how some illegal aliens are being tracked. In this case, he got released on the criminal case, just like if he was a U.S. citizen, meaning that right now, as you and I speak, he's walking around free pending trial. That cannot happen. So ICE would have all the authority to go back and pick him up again, and he could wait his trial date while in an ICE detention facility. I think that's going to be the next move, because the federal government here in the U.S. is doing nothing illegal. People think that they're violating his rights, and I hear this due process. Well, if you want to talk about due process, this one has gotten way more than anyone ever gets when it comes to due process. So much that he got brought back from El Salvador. I actually didn't think that was going to happen. But these judges are interfering and obstructing, I believe, with the real due process of the criminal justice system in the United States government. And all of a sudden, it's becoming a joke in the United States that a judge is going to back up and tell Iran to stop the bombing, because these judges think that they have this ultimate power when one system does not interact with the other, especially when it comes to this. We got the executive branch, and then we have the judicial branch. And although there's checks and balances in the United States, there's interference at this point now with that judicial system, which is a big, big issue going forward, because this is not the only case. There's other cases that they've done it where they're interfering and objecting with the removal of an illegal alien from the United States, which, like you mentioned before, is suffering with the numbers, right? Obama was averaging about 1,500 a day. Right now, the Trump administration is averaging about 600 a day. So no one said anything. I worked under the Obama administration, and I don't remember anyone ever obstructing me for deporting anybody. Nobody actually really cared. And there's another thing. The due process was less under Obama. There's more due process now because there's more paperwork now. There's more red tape and more bureaucracy to actually remove a person from the country, meaning that they make it harder to remove a person. There's certain aspects of how the illegal alien came in, what country do they come from, what area, how they came in. It's all these criteria that has to be met. And that's why they're put in a detention facility that these people want to break into. And that is the due process. It takes a while to vet the person and process them on the way out. Remember, they processed them on the way in, millions and millions under the Biden administration with no vetting. But as soon as you want to do it the other way around, it's illegal and they're not allowed to do it.
I studied law briefly 30 years ago. And one of the first things we learnt, and it was an interesting test, was that if the situation was that somebody wanted to sue somebody else whilst they were attacked while a criminal act was taking place, and it was ruled that they couldn't because they weren't protected because a crime was taking place. And the same logic applies here, that if you commit a crime to get into the country, then you don't get due process on the way out. But it seems that this is the great big avoidance that we're suffering through at the moment. This crazy progressive world that we know there is an ulterior motive, because it's a pathway to create endless power through all means and through the voting ballot. And that's probably why I guess that you also would have run for Congress.
Believe me, I tried. I don't think they were ready for me yet. I tried to run for Congress a year and a half ago along the Texas border. I mean, that's my forte. This is my expertise. But believe it or not, I got challenged more from my own party. than from the left, and people here understand that. There's, I guess, honesty and integrity. It's not welcomed in Washington, D.C., which is a shame, because all I want is, I was applying for a job. Like, I applied for many jobs in my career. I was just applying for a job to allow me to implement some of these policies from a person that had been there and done that, which I always questioned when I was on the field. And I always said, what in the world is Washington, D.C. doing? And why are they making these decisions? Because it was a 25-year-old kid making the decisions that had never been to the border, that had never even been outside of the country, making these impactful decisions that impacted us on the field level. And I always said, why isn't there somebody like me, at least that knows a little bit about what's going on in Washington, assessing, advising these people to make the right decisions? Well, I might live in an unbelievable world that doesn't exist, a utopia, but I just wanted to give it a shot to do that. But I think I'm better served now from the outside in, because I get to then still have some influence and meet with some of these officials that are great friends of mine, like Tom Homan and Rodney Scott, the CBP commissioner, and others that I've worked with for many, many years, that are now in these positions, that I could then come up and say, this is what's going on, and have a better impact.
Indeed. As somebody else who has stood for more than one political party, I too can concur that the enemy within your own party can often be worse than your opponent. It's truly shocking. Politics is a blood sport, and I like to quote the late Dr. Zev Zelenko, who brought it to the main for me. Now, this will probably be our last question, because we're going to run out of time, but Tom Homan at the weekend was on Fox News talking about the possibility of sleeper cells in the United States as a result of President Trump's three-pronged attack on nuclear sites in Iran. Where does that fit into the reality today? And could this be the real threat that might force America's hand against Iran? How do you feel about that?
I believe that that's actually the real threat. It's not Iran attacking us from Iran. It's their sympathizers and their sleeper cell groups within the United States. I have no doubt they are here. They live in the United States. They've been here. As a matter of fact, they've been in Mexico and Central America for a long time. I used to interview these people. We call them special interest aliens, SIAs, that came from special interest countries like Bangladesh, Somalia, Yemen, and Syria. And I interviewed them. They were in Mexico. And I'm like, what in the world are you doing here? Well, they were on their way to the United States, and it was very difficult to vet them because we didn't have their name of they're all named Mohammeds. Their all date of births were on January 1st, and they had different identities, one at the southern border of Mexico, one in Mexico City, and then a third identity at our border. And now they find themselves here in the U.S., and they have established, they've been so patient that they've established communities in Mexico. I'm talking about building mosques, and I'm talking about real establishment, so much that they have incorporated themselves in the Mexican culture, shaved their beards, and came in. A lot of them came in with those, remember the caravans that came in? A lot of them came into those caravans with different identities that we have absolutely no idea. And even under the last 4 years under the Biden administration, they came in, they walked across, and they told us, I'm from Iran, and you shouldn't have allowed me into this country. We have videos of people telling us that. How scary is that? But I believe it's the sympathizers, it's those proxies, those groups that might or might not have the control from Iran, whether they're in Hezbollah, whether they're in Venezuela, and they go crazy here and want to set an example for their ideology and their allegiance to these groups. That's what I'm concerned about. And that's, I think, why everyone is on high alert. The CBP commissioner, Rodney Scott, put out an alert to all the CBP on the border. Tom Homan, everyone is very well aware that these individuals are here. And so everybody's now eyes are wide open, paying attention, again, being aware. If somebody's acting a little strange, what is it? I mean, there was already the guy that drove the truck into the church in Nebraska, I believe, over the weekend. So inevitably, I think it's going to happen. We wanted to, if it is, to have it in a controlled environment as quickly as possible, so it won't be a large-scale attack. Because people ask me, can you prevent it? My goodness, that's a difficult question to answer. We would love to think that we could prevent these attacks and maybe unfoil some of these before they happen. And that does happen a lot, by the way. And law enforcement doesn't get that credit because usually the ones that are unfoiled never make the news because it never happened. But it does happen every single day. The FBI, federal, state, and local police are unfoiling plots a lot and saving lives. It just so happens that there's going to be those that are not going to be on the radar. They're not on the FBI watch list. That no one knows about them. They've been in the U.S. and then they act.
To become a good politician, a congressman, is to be an all-rounder, but to arrive with a set of skills of which you have in abundance. The economic system in which we work on or work with is based on scarcity. Donald Trump created a system where he wanted to create economic opportunity like never seen before. And yet we live in a world where we have a term that I think I've coined called financial nihilism amongst young people today, the disbelief that they'll ever be able to afford a home, for example. And they at best can get into a rent cycle, and for many can't even find a property. Certainly here in Australia, there's a shortage. So they give up, but at the same time become militant. And then you have people like Bernie Sanders, who 30 years on, after they say that Iran is talking about enriching uranium for 30 years, Bernie Sanders has been talking about fighting oligarchy for 30 years, and he's out there again pointing his finger ho, 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 down almost like a Muppet character. And it's embarrassing because he's not going to do anything except get all these people to say that we need to take from the rich. Everyone wants to become a Robin Hood, if you will. Where I'm going is that Trump is the first person I've seen that's virtually trying to move to a system of abundance, which is the opposite of scarcity, meaning that there is enough for everyone. Given that scenario then, given that the drug cartel works in operation and is incredibly powerful and rich through criminal pursuits, the work of ICE is to create and to serve a rules-based order, law and order. Why is it so difficult, therefore, that we just can't get to a stage? Given perception is reality, do we just live in a world that is beyond wild now? Or do we look that there is a case, and is this Trump era period the turning point in history? Are you confident, therefore, that the man who is sitting in the Oval Office 47 is putting the steps in place to be able to deliver? Or are we just going through this total decline of the way that humanity is in the 21st century?
No, I think what President Trump does is give people that hope and change. Remember those two terms? Who said that? Obama, hope and change. And that got him through the election in 2008. Well, the real hope and change is when the middle class starts seeing more money in their pocket, and when the college graduate actually gets a job that pays them for the degree that they actually went and studied for. That's what we want. I want to be able to give my kids more than what my parents gave me. That's the American dream. That's what the successful of the positive cycle. We don't want to see the cycle of poverty anymore, of crime, and not uneducated in that cycle. We want to be able to break that cycle. And I think Trump, first of all, he does it not by giving it to you, but by holding you accountable, by telling you you have a sense of responsibility as a human being. We're going to be here to back you up, but you got to be able to do it yourself. And the Democrats and the Bernie Sanders of the world is hand me, give me. And the problem is that these kids, especially in the institutions that they go to, in the universities in the United States, come out thinking that way. And they come out entitled, right? Well, I can't get a house. Well, somebody better give me a house. Well, somebody better buy me a car. And well, the parents can't do it anymore. I mean, our taxes are going through the roof. And this is where the change comes in. Donald Trump is the one that took that wrench and threw it in the middle of that spinning tire and disrupted whatever was going on, whether you call it the deep state, whether you call it whatever you want to call it. But all I know is that there's a disruption, a good one, a good disruption, a dismantling, something that I consider when I dealt with the cartels is you identify them, you stop them, you dismantle them and disrupt them. That's what I think Donald Trump is doing in Washington, D.C. And that affects a lot of people, including your own party. Let's be real about it. Let's talk the truth. As a matter of fact, probably more of our own party, because we know who the left is. That's easy. We know who they are. We know who Bernie Sanders are and AOC, and that's easy. What's very difficult is when you have somebody pretending to be like you, saying the same words that you say, and is completely the opposite in real world, and voting with the left and doing the opposite of what they tell you. That, I think, is what the American people are sick and tired of with these politicians. As they say one thing during the election cycle, and as soon as they go over there, let's see what happens with the big beautiful bill, for example. Let's see, we thought we were all on the same page, and all of a sudden, well, we control the House and the Senate. How can that be any problem? We should be rubber stamping bills left and right, but it doesn't. Why doesn't it work that way? Because we have people with an R in front of their names that do not truly believe that. They're not true conservatives. They're not true believers in the family, in the true economic sense. The two major subjects here in the last couple of years has been border security and the economy. And guess what? Today, it's border security and the economy, because border security is tied to what's happening in Iran. I mean, you cannot talk about one without talking about the other, because how did they gain access? Well, through the open border system that was created 4 years ago. Now the border is very different. It's sealed. That's good. But now we have to deal with the consequences within our borders. One thing is the terrorism threat. The other thing is crime. We have a lot of crime in the United States to begin. We have a crime surge here. Third, fentanyl. Let's not forget about fentanyl. I mean, hundreds of thousands of Americans have died of fentanyl poisonings. And it continues to happen because the fentanyl still continues to come in because of the help of China. We all know that. And so we have real issues within our country. And I think people are saying, come on, we've helped the rest of the world. We want to help the rest of the world, but let's give ourselves our own lift. And I think that's what President Trump gives you, the opportunity, but you got to be able to move. And if you do, things are going to go right for you.
Well, we began the conversation talking about a moment in your life that changed you forever, a recognition that if you are a believer, that God spared you. Similarly, there is nothing new under the sun, and Bernie Sanders talks about giving a man a fish to feed him. Donald Trump teaches you to fish to become self-sufficient. And that's what I mean. It is almost biblical from whichever way you look at this. And the world needs more people like Victor Avila to be able to teach us that there is a right way and a wrong way. And whichever way we go about it, there is a pathway to success, to even abundance, where all of us can leave the world a better place for our children, which when we are born and our parents teach us that we have free will, all of us set out on a pathway to that way, and somehow it gets corrupted by a system of evil that is in it for itself, pretending that it's not. And with that, we are always confused. Thank you for your time today. An incredible interview, Victor, and I look forward to finishing the book and continuing to watch your career as a leader for all Americans to follow.
I thank you for the time today as well. Thank you.
Well, what a wonderful interview. We're going to take another break, and when we come back, we are going to meet Ali Safavi from the Iranian Resistance Council, and we're going to have another brilliant conversation. Don't go anywhere. You're watching The 51st State. And welcome back to the 51st State. Well, with the events that we have seen coming out of the Middle East and with President Trump, one might imagine that Ali Safavi is a very busy man right now. But because the 51st state is what it is and our production team is what it is, we are not taking one step back. In fact, Shahin Gabadi, a US-educated nuclear engineer, is a member also of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, Iran's parliament in exile, and he will join me in just a moment. He's an astute observer of Iranian affairs for over 3 decades, is an expert on topics including Iranian state-sponsored terrorism, proxy groups in the Middle East, the Iranian nuclear and weapons of mass destruction programs, Western policy towards Iran, and eternal Iranian affairs. He's been interviewed by major TV outlets including CNN, Fox, BBC, GB News. He's also been on the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, The Times, The Daily Telegraph, Reuters, and the AP. And he joins me now on the 51st state. Shahin, welcome to the 51st state.
Thank you for having me in your show.
Well, it's quite extraordinary times that we have seen. I mean, the timing of this interview is just extraordinary. Now, we saw obviously what's happened over the weekend with the B-2s bombing these particular sites. A fair bit of controversy about the outcome, but the president of the United States steadfast that he has not only destroyed Iran's nuclear program, at least in the eyes of perception being reality in the eyes of the world, calming the jets, calling it off and arranging a ceasefire. Now, there has been some suggestion that the ceasefire has been breached, and there are plenty of people in the world second-guessing the president. What I would like to do is I'm going to play you a quick clip, and then we'll come back because I would like to get your reaction about the events that have unfolded over the last 24 to 36 hours. Here, take a look.
Then President Trump got directly involved, calling Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, telling him to turn the jets around. Ultimately, the Israelis conducted just one strike outside of the Iranian capital against an Iranian radar system. This was able to contain the possibility of this spiraling out of control, and as of right now, the ceasefire is holding. Harris?
Trey, before I let you go real quickly, oftentimes we'll be able to see from your video and some of our other correspondents, you know, the immediate reaction to the ceasefire was caught with Netanyahu on the streets, people hailing him a hero, offering him free coffee, so on and so forth. Today is a different day, and I am curious, are people still as optimistic about a ceasefire? Everybody who's a citizen, I would imagine, would rather have peace. On both sides, actually.
Absolutely. Absolutely, on both sides. The civilian population is paying an incredibly heavy price. And when you look at billboards along Israel's main highway in Tel Aviv, there's a large picture of President Trump, and it says, "Thank you, Mr. President." The people in Israel are breathing a sigh of relief. They've just experienced one of the most intense periods in the history of this country. And now it appears it is over following these efforts by President Trump.
So we've seen an upside-down result here in terms of a ceasefire, which can only be meaning peace, which we saw in the clip there, that people are very excited in Israel at the least, and even offering to buy the Prime Minister a coffee, which is extraordinary given the sadness and the fear that many people have suffered. So what was your reaction, firstly, to the announcement of the ceasefire by the President Trump?
Well, immediately after the ceasefire was announced and it was proposed, Madam Mariam Rajavi, the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, very much welcomed it. And she said that is a step forward because it clearly showed that the ultimate solution for the Iranian situation is a regime change by the Iranian people that is from basically bottom up. And it showed that the ultimate solution is neither war or appeasement, but a regime change by the Iranian people. And she said that it once again showed that the Iranian situation needs to be changed, but by the Iranian people, an establishment of a democratic republic in Iran, which calls for separation of government and religion, an end to the death penalty, and a non-nuclear Iran. So in that sense, we very much welcomed peace, which is basically, as I said, once again showed that the ultimate solution is a third option, which is not war foreign war or appeasement.
Now, doing some research yesterday, I learnt that Iran holds the highest level of executions of any country in the world. How is that possible, and what are people being executed for in Iran?
Basically, I think that's a very, very important issue you just raised, Jason. You see, the fact of the matter is, the main war, the underlying war that has not been focused upon in the past 4 decades, simply the Iranian people want to get rid of this regime, which has imposed itself on the Iranian people. In the course of the last 4 decades, 120,000 Iranians, men and women, some as young as 13-year-old teenage girls, have been executed in Iran simply standing up for democracy and human rights. And 90% of them belong to a resistance movement, actually to the main Iranian resistance movement called the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, also with the acronym MEK. You see, National Council of Resistance of Iran is a coalition of Iranian opposition movements, which are both anti-Shah, anti-Mullah. Basically, they reject any form of dictatorship. And the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran is the main constituent of that coalition. And as I said, 120,000 Iranians have been executed solely for sympathizing or to be an activist of this resistance. You might find it shocking, which is truly shocking, that 30,000 political prisoners were executed in Iran just in a matter of a few months in summer of 1988, simply because they did not relent to the regime and remain steadfast. And again, 90% of them belong to the MEK resistance movement. So yes, execution has been a tool of survival, and I would say probably the most important tool of survival for this regime. And that's why as the regime gets weaker and its hold to power is ebbing, you have seen a significant spike in the executions in Iran. Iran has about 1% of the world population, give and take. But last year, according to Amnesty International, in 2024, 64% of the executions in the whole world, the world over, took place in Iran. That is because the Iranian people really want to get rid of this regime. Obviously, some of these executions are done under different various pretexts, but a lot of them are also political. And as we speak now, many political prisoners, many of them, again, belonging to MEK resistance movement, are at death row. So yes, execution has been the main, basically, tool of survival of this regime.
Now, I'll make it a little bit personal. At its heart, everyone in the Western world would believe that they would like to be able to raise their children, live in peace, and leave the world a better place in which they found it. How do Iranian people in general see the world? Would it be similar or something different?
Totally similar. Iranian people are very well educated people with lots of aspirations. Please keep in mind, you're talking about Iran, one of the cradles of civilization, a country which has had an state for more than 3,000 years, with so many great poets, so many great scientists, so many great mathematicians, so many great physicians. I mean, this nation has contributed so much to the world, civilization over the years. What we have seen in the last, I would say, 120 years is an ongoing struggle between the Iranian people and despots who have ruled them. And the despots have come in two forms. One in the form of monarchists. The latest one was the Pahlavi dynasty that was synonymous with execution, torture, nepotism, and corruption. And that's why they were booted out by the Iranian people by a massive uprising in 1979. And tragically, because of years and decades of repression, an imposter named Khomeini was able to hijack the leadership of that revolution and gave it this extremist basically turn that we witness today. And then immediately after, the Iranian people realized that Khomeini was an imposter and they turned against him. And that has been the story which I just mentioned for the past 40 plus years. And at the core of this is this unrelenting resistance that for the last 60 years, I'm talking about MEK, have fought unrelentingly against any form of dictatorship. Iranian people want to live in peace. They want to live in a civilized world. They want to have, be able to prosper like any civilized nation and have everything one would imagine. They are very well educated. They are very issue oriented. God has given them a lot of resources. Let's keep in mind that while Iran has, again, as I said, 1% of the world population, it has about 7 to 8% of the world resources. Iran has the second biggest gas reserves in the world and third biggest oil reserves in the world. So these two figures by itself tells you how resourceful that nation is. But the only thing that there is a problem is this regime that not only exploits the people, but also plunders their resources and uses it for its basically malign objectives, driving to acquire nuclear weapons, propping up proxy groups all over the Middle East, and plunders their resources. So now you see why there's such a profound, deep movement for change in Iran, because people see the potentials and they see it's all taken away from them because of this rotten regime.
It's remarkable, isn't it, when you consider that we all want the same things, and yet we are somehow gaslit, or for want of a better term, that the human beings behind the leadership of said countries are all the same. We all want the same things. Here in Australia, we have been weakened to a point where no matter how hard we protest against the government, it doesn't seem to affect any change. And we have a situation that was tested in COVID about how hard we would comply with the government when it was put upon us about a virus that had nothing more than cold symptoms. And so it was that you dobbed in your neighbor and you did things that were horrific, and you made them do things like wearing a mask on their face for no apparent reason whatsoever, to the point where government would walk all over us in a country that would be the exact antithesis of what we would consider an Iranian regime that holds the highest level of executions in the world. Here, we almost have virtually, no punishment, by example. Not that we don't have prisons. Of course, we have people that commit crimes, but it's meant to be very free and very fair, etc., a model for the world to follow, and yet we are weakened. So my question, therefore, is, in the 21st century, are the Iranian people as capable as they were in the past to overthrow the current regime, or will they need some sort of help to do so?
Oh, Jason, I think you raised a very, very crucial question. In order to get a better sense of what's going on in Iran, I think it's very important to appreciate the simple facts. There has been 5 nationwide uprisings in Iran since December 2017 alone. 5 times. And each time it gets bigger, more pervasive, more steadfast, more inclusive. The last round was in September 2022. I think a lot of your viewers and listeners might remember that there was this protest about the death of this young Kurdish woman, Mahsa Amini. And the thing was, it lasted for months. It went well into 2023. And you know what? Iran has 31 provinces, and the protests took place in all 31 provinces, in more than 300 cities and towns throughout the country. And even Gen Zs got involved. People from all walks of life got involved. A lot of national minorities got involved. So that shows that there's such a unison in crying for freedom. It's very true that each round it was repressed ruthlessly. In the last round, around 750 protesters, dozens of them teenagers and women were basically either beaten to death or they were shot to death, and 90,000 protesters were detained and tortured, yet people have not relented. And actually, there are all signs that another uprising looms on the horizon. And also, I think what you will find interesting is that there is a very, very active resistance network inside Iran, because you can have all sorts of dissent, but that necessarily does not transform into a major change. It will be suppressed and suppressed. But the good thing is the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, or MEK, has a vast network of activists inside Iran, formed in what's called resistance units, and they are like a tip of the arrow. They are the ones who basically try to break this atmosphere of fear and repression in Iran, which is imposed and instilled on the Iranian people by burning the big pictures of the regime's supreme leader Ali Khamenei or his statues, or sometimes go against the centers of the local militias, which are the regime's apparatus called Basij. And on the other hand, also put big banners and posters of the resistance leader, Madam Mariam Rajavi, who is the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, to encourage people to stand up. And the good thing is, despite all the crackdown on all the risks, more and more young people, especially women, are joining. They know what risk it entails, but they know this is the only way forward. So in that respect, the prospects for change in Iran is very, very bright. Now, what does it take? As Madam Mariam Rajavi addressed the European Parliament last Wednesday, and again, as she testified before the U.S. Congress online, because she's based in Paris, before the U.S. Congress, we do not seek any boots on the grounds. We do not seek any money from any foreign government, U.S. or Australia or whatsoever. We do not seek any weapons from any foreign government. We think the Iranian change should be done by the Iranian people and the resistance, and solely by them. And they are up to the challenge. But we want the world to be on the side of the resistance and the people. We want them to recognize the right of the Iranian people to bring about a regime change by themselves, for themselves, and establish it through democracy. And there's a viable alternative in the National Council of Resistance of Iran, which has a 10-point plan for the transitional period when the mullahs are gone, which calls for separation of religion and government, meaning that the government would be secular. There will be total gender equality. There will be freedom of association, freedom of thought. It will be total rights for autonomy for all the national minorities. And there will be a non-nuclear Iran, and no capital punishment, and a good, mutual, amicable, amiable, friendly relationship with the rest of the world. These are the tenets of this 10-point plan, which has been introduced by Madam Rajavi, is known as Mariam Rajavi's 10-point plan for the future of Iran. So the point I'm trying to make is that the situation inside Iran is ripe for change. People want change. They are courageous enough to stand up, and they pay the price. There's an organized resistance inside the country. There's a viable alternative ready to take over, and it has a clear-cut roadmap. So Iranians have done what it takes to bring about a change, and all the, as they say, chickens are coming home to roost for the supreme leader.
An extraordinary answer, and thank you for describing the said 10-point plan. Look, I was going to ask you about the religion or the religious divide. You did mention, belief in God, etc. Now, for us outsiders not understanding Islam, we're only just learning the differences, perhaps some of us, between Sunni and Shia, and that Iran, Iraq, Bahrain follow Shiites versus Sunnis, for example, and it's a belief in a descendant of Muhammad or there being no descendant, and this divides people. Having said that, you've described other religions, etc., beliefs within, and you've also described a separation is required for perhaps what may be considered by us here in the West as religious fanaticism, and therefore it would be a healthy divide, therefore. Juxtaposing that with what Ali said in a recent, maybe a couple of years ago now, in the parliamentary elections held in Tehran, only 19% of people actually voted. Therefore, there is an entire separation with the current system on multiple levels. So I guess where I'm going with this is that not proof enough to show the rest of the world that Iran must move away from the current system, that they must now accept that regime change is not only inevitable, but it's almost compulsory?
Well, you raised a very, very important and a crucial point. Look, first of all, we believe that there should be no imposition and no compulsion when it comes to religion. Religion and government should be totally separated. And as you know, in NCRI, there are ethnic minorities as well as religious minorities, like Christian, people who believe in Jewish faith, Zoroastrians, which predates Islam, and so that's the way things should be, and that's the way we believe. And the issue is not Sunni Shiite at all. This is what the regime in Tehran tries to exploit to pursue their ominous and malign objectives. Sinister. Iranians for centuries lived Shiite Sunnis together, and the fact that Iran props up extremists. What's funny is that when it comes to propping up extremists and terrorists, this regime does not distinguish between Shiites and Sunnis. It helps extremist terrorist groups of quote-unquote Shiite belief, the same way it supports the terrorist Sunni, those who quote-unquote believe in Sunni Islam. So actually, we think the Islam that the MEK stands for is totally antidote to the Islam that the mullahs believe. What I mean is that we believe Islam is a religion of compassion, tolerance, mercy, coexistence, peace, and not only in words, but in practice. One key demarcation here is our attitude towards women. For instance, for the bunch who are ruling in Iran, vulgarizing Islam, women are second-class citizens. Misogyny is one of the trademarks of these extremists. And in our movement, not only the president-elect Mariam Rajavi is a courageous woman, but also women constitute more than 50% of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, and many of them hold senior key positions, which is like a day and night when it comes how Iran is ruled currently by the misogynist bunch who are ruling Iran. So basically the point I'm trying to make is that yes, when it comes to the future Iran, there should be and would be a separation of religion and government. And now, on the second part of your observation regarding the regimes being isolated, it's even much worse than what you said. During one of those quote-unquote debates for presidency a few years ago, one of the candidates said, look, we are the government of 4%, which means 96% of the people in Iran hate them. They loathe them. They despise them. They want to get rid of them. And this regime has ruled solely by executions, torture, and also by creating chaos and havoc outside of Iran as another pillar of their survival. But guess what? The regime has been weakened on both legs. Inside Iran, as I just mentioned to you, there's been uprising after uprising, very courageously. And also regionally, the regime took a lot of beatings, particularly last year when it came to its proxies like, Hezbollah in Lebanon or Houthis in Yemen. And the climax was the overthrow of Bashar Assad dictatorship in Syria, which was the linchpin of the regime's regional strategy. So when I said all the chickens are coming home to roost for the supreme leader, it was based on these facts and based on this trajectory that change in Iran is very much not only within reach, but much sooner than it might be perceived.
Now, you are a US educated nuclear engineer. Here in the West, again, there is an argument that there was no nuclear program, despite the fact that the Atomic Energy Commission revealed that nuclear enrichment levels could only facilitate a nuclear weapon. At the same time, the president said he has wiped out, this is the US president said he's wiped out the nuclear facilities. CNN today comes up and says the nuclear program could come back in a matter of a few months. And I think, hold on a second, you just told the world that they don't have a nuclear program. Can you explain to us, does Iran or did Iran have a nuclear enrichment program that would lead to a nuclear bomb or not?
Definitely did. Let me provide a little bit of background. This nuclear program started more than 3 decades ago. Since 1991, to be exact, on June 1991, the NCRI, based on the intelligence that the network of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, the MEK, provided them from inside Iran, exposed that the mullahs are building a nuclear weapons program. From the day one, it was quite clear to us that this program has no civilian purposes and it is solely done to acquire nuclear weapons. In the course of the last 3 decades, in particular, the last 23 years, we have exposed 133 different secret nuclear sites, projects, research centers, and other elements of this nuclear project, which are all have been clandestine. So we never had any doubt that this is all for nuclear weapons as a guarantor for the regime's survival. It had nothing to do with the civilian need. Iran does not need nuclear energy. As I said, we have committed that the future of Iran will be non-nuclear. Iran has the second biggest gas reserves, the third biggest oil reserves, and for at least 200 years to come. It's like, you see, it's like an Eskimo investing everything he or she has to buy a fridge. What kind of a economic explanation does it make? Does not. Actually, when what happened on Sunday, when there were attacks on these 3 sites, by the way, 2 of which were revealed by the NCRI, Madame Rajavi said that this is an unpatriotic project that has been pursued by the regime's supreme leader Ali Khamenei. Innumerable number of Iranians have lost their lives because of it, and Iran has suffered $2 trillion, that's $2,000 billion, because of this project. And what for? And it all went into smoke. So there's no doubt in our mind that the regime is pursuing this for nuclear weapons. From another perspective, for a nuclear weapon, you need enriched uranium up to 90%. The regime is already enriching to 60%, and going from 60% to 90% doesn't take much time. It also requires weaponization, implosion, to make it work like a bomb. And it also means that it has to be transformed into a warhead to be put on a ballistic missile, which is called delivery system. And our intelligence showed that the regime is diligently working in all 3 tracks, while the world only focused mostly on enrichment of uranium, rightly so, through IAEA, the eyes and ears of United Nations, the entity that monitors this. In reality, the weaponization and delivery system were worked on clandestinely. And we made a lot of revelations about this. Jason, I can tell you this with utmost confidence, that if it were not for our revelations, the mullahs would have had the bomb by now. And the most active state sponsor of terrorism would have been equipped with the most dangerous weapon. And I think we have done the world, and first of all, the Iranian people, a great service, entailing a great sacrifice to prevent this from happening.
To clarify, the mullahs partly were or wholly interested in developing nuclear weapons for their own survival as much as it would be to threaten the rest of the world. So they almost want to threaten their own people as much as everyone else. Is that true?
Very much so. Look, they want to say, look, we have nuclear weapons. We are untouchable. We are invincible. We want to gain concessions from the others. We want to blackmail the others. And that's the way they will get a staying power. Actually, as the regime got weaker and weaker inside Iran, and they took all these regional beatings, we revealed that they have, in the past few months, focused more on obtaining nuclear weapons. I'm talking about prior to this recent developments of the last 2 weeks. Actually, in the last 6 months, from December 2024 to May 2025, they made 4 new revelations about secret sites that they were working on weaponization and especially delivery system, all based on the vast network of the resistance activists inside Iran. Because, as I said, it's our patriotic duty to prevent this to happen. This is the only reason the mullahs have pursued this program, because, as I said, from no economic standpoint, from no energy standpoint, this does make sense. I mean, only wonder why they are so persistent. It is all intertwined with their survival. And if you want to talk about this, I can go on for hours and if not days and days into details about why this project is solely for nuclear weapons and has no bearings to civilian purposes, as the regime claims. Just one example. The regime has never been transparent about informing the IAEA about its sites, the major sites, Natanz, Iraq, Fordow, you name it, all have been primarily exposed by the NCRI. And even after they were exposed, the regime's reaction has been hide and seek, catch me if you can, concealment. And when they were eventually caught in the corner, procrastinating, not allowing inspections, and at the end of the day, a lot of what I call facelifting. So by the time the inspectors come, they would have a much harder time to find traces and evidence. And if the regime has no skeleton in the closet, what's this all about? Very simple question.
It's extraordinary because you just think, going back to where we started from, just the simplicity of a simple hope for your life, something as simple as that, but a fanaticism that comes in and a thirst and a lust for power and power at all costs. And I'm reminded of Kash Patel, the current director of the FBI, explaining the deep state, something along the lines of absolute power using all means possible to remain in power. And that describes the US deep state. And you are effectively describing the Iranian deep state, if you will. I look at the work that Donald Trump did in answering the question of the bombing and getting out, to which Australia, our left-wing, far left-wing government, Anthony Albanese and Foreign Minister Penny Wong, effectively were forced to come out and to say that they agreed with Donald Trump's strikes, but then supported negotiation from that point, which has resulted in the said ceasefire. In other words, they have been absolutely down the line 100% agreement with the president. If that's the case, therefore, that the far left, which we have in Australia, to Donald Trump in the United States, Western governments must all now be on side with the move that Trump made. So regardless of what people think, regardless of the effectiveness of the said attacks, if perception is reality, everyone following along now must believe that Iran's nuclear program has been so far damaged that now the next stage is to create regime change. The nuclear weapons program, one way or another, becomes irrelevant at that point because the bad actors are now out of power. And yet the mainstream media wants to pretend, or at least try and create more fear. And this, again, is this whole point of this deep state that we keep talking about. Therefore, do you believe that President Trump has now paved a way for a brand new future for Iran and for your group and for the resistance within the country to now move towards long-lasting peace? Has he achieved, or do you think that he's provided the opportunity to achieve such a goal, which would be the end game for all of us?
Well, allow me to answer this question in a different perspective. You see, in the course of the last 3 decades, the underlying policy of the West, and here I don't differentiate between this side of the Atlantic and the other side of the Atlantic and Pacific to that effect, can be described in one word and one word only: appeasement. They try to appease the mullahs, try to placate them, kowtow to them, and provided so many unwarranted and ethically wrong concessions. And look what happened. The mullahs took the cake and ate it too. They took all the concessions and turned it into means to pursue their objectives, be it the nuclear weapons program, or stifling their proxies, or paying for the repression at home, or for plundering the Iranian people's wealth. So we always believed that this appeasement should be abandoned, because the Iranian people paid the ultimate price for this appeasement. Resistance paid the ultimate price for appeasement. I said, and I repeat, and as Madame Rajavi, the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance, has said time and again, and as I said, as recent of this last Wednesday before the European Parliament, the task of the regime change and bringing about a change is by the Iranian people and their organized resistance. But appeasement has made it much more difficult, much more costly for the Iranian people, and has provided a lifeline to this regime, which is totally illegitimate. Having said this, we call for a firm policy on Iran. Now, a firm policy for years has been, immediately translated into, belligerence and warmongering. Far from it. We say firm policy does not mean boots on the ground, does not mean foreign war, does not translate into providing even financial help to the resistance, and we don't want it, to be honest. We have said it time and again, and does not translate into weapons for the resistance. That's not what we are seeking. But what does it entail? First of all, much tougher sanctions on the regime financially, because every penny, every dime, every cent they get is used for pursuing the sinister objectives which I just mentioned. Number two, hold the regime's leaders accountable for all their crimes. And we just touched upon a very few of them in this talk. This regime has carried out upward of 450 terrorist acts all over the world, targeting dissidents, targeting intellectuals, and so on and so forth, bombing events. And number three, which is very important, is to recognize the right of the Iranian people and the resistance to change this regime and establish democracy. This is an inalienable right of the Iranian people, and this should be very much recognized by the Western governments. That's all we are asking. And a good policy constitutes these three elements. And that will put the mullahs on the spot. Because at the end of the day, the change should come from the Iranian people and in the streets of Tehran, Shiraz, Isfahan, and all these cities, be it metropolitans or being towns. So that's all we are asking. And we want the world to be on the side of the Iranian people and the resistance. Because look, a change in Iran will have a huge impact, not only in the region, but it will be transformative for the whole world. Imagine Iran is contributing to the world peace. In Iran, that instead of harboring terrorists, contributes to advancement of science. And Iran, with all its talent, is helping, would be a role model for democracy, where women can be even the president. And I think that is not a dream anymore. That's very much within reach. Now, we will get there. But the right policy will make it quicker, less bloody, more expeditious. An appeasement policy, a policy of vacillation, procrastination, will make it longer and more costly for Iranian people and more dangerous for the rest of the world. The choices could not be more stark than they are today.
I just want to ask you one last question, just for clarity, for those that are trying to piece it together, the difference between the US administrations. How much damage did it cause or set back the cause when Barack Obama's administration sent over plane loads of actual cash for this Iran nuclear deal arrangement?
You see, this was the epitome of this appeasement policy which I just mentioned. the Obama administration, Clinton administration, Biden administration, they bent backward and forward to placate these criminal, bloody mullahs. And guess who paid the price? The Iranian people, first and foremost, and the Iranian resistance. And also, you have to remember, Jason, since you raised it, another aspect of the mullahs campaign. We talked about executions and torture, but do you know what's the other aspect? Is this what I call demonization campaign against the Iranian resistance? Trying to depict it as being undemocratic and this and that and this and that. So the world would think that the choices in Iran is either war or you are stuck with the mullahs, as bad as they are. But the reality is there is a third option. There is a viable democratic alternative out there. The reason the mullahs and their lobbyists and their proponents and those who have their vested interest to see the status quo be prolonged, as vicious as it is, try to depict it as though the opposition are a bunch of villains. The MEK, they call them terrorists and so on and so forth. So people do not dare to, consider them. But in reality, I think as time has gone by, people realize that this movement is very genuine, truly democratic. Now, the majority members of the U.S. House of Representatives have, in a bipartisan way, endorsed Madam Rajavi's 10-point plan. The same with the majority members of the British House of Commons and their peers in a cross-party way, the majority members of the Italian Parliament, and so on and so forth. In all, 4,000 parliamentarians have endorsed Madam Rajavi's 10-point plan for a very bright roadmap for the future of Iran, an Iran that would not be chaotic. Another myth that they perpetuated was that if the mullahs go, Iran will be chaos like Libya, or it will be an Iraq 2 scenario. And we said, look, this is red herring. Iran is very different. It has a very grassroots resistance movement. It has a very indigenous democratic alternative. These are all basically conjured up to prevent a good and solid policy. Now, the time has come to put all of this aside, to understand these are all byproducts of this appeasement policy to justify placating the mullahs, and start a new chapter when it comes to Iran policy to help to bring about a new chapter for Iran altogether.
It's the beginning of a new age for the Iranian people. And like we started this interview by inquiring as to what we share in common, and we share a lot in common. We all believe and want the same things. And those words remind me of JFK. We all breathe the same air. Shaheen, you have inspired us here in the West via the show The 51st State to feel confident that the right people are in the right place at the right time in history, to realize that what we have now seen, that the president has called the bluff of Israel, has called the bluff of the mullahs, and has provided that the people have the opportunity to predict and call for their own future. I am impressed by a man who was an outsider, who became the US president, who changed my political beliefs 180 degrees. And I hope that means that very soon we will see said regime change. We will see the lifting of sanctions for a brand new secular government in Iran, and that the people of Iran can thrive, and that people like me in the West will be able to get onto an aeroplane and fly over to meet those in exile who have now returned to the homeland, and we can sit and share and talk about our lives together in peace and prosperity. You inspire us all, and we wish you all the very, very most success as soon as possible. Thank you for your time today on the 51st State.
Oh, Jason, thank you for having me on your show, giving me the opportunity to show some aspects of reality in Iran. Iranians are one of the most hospitable people in this planet. And this is not, I don't say this because I'm a patriotic Iranian, but that's a reality. Iranians are very nice people with very, very good intentions. All they basically miss the government. And I'll ask your good viewers, whoever they are, wherever they are, to go to our website, ncr-iran.org. I repeat, ncr-iran.org, and see facts about Iran that they don't find anywhere else, facts that come from inside Iran. and ask their members of parliament and the senators to be on the side of the Iranian people and their aspirations and the National Council of Resistance of Iran and Madam Rajavi's 10-point plan. And once again, thanks for having me in your show, and I wish you best of days and months to come.
As we do you. Well, what a wonderful interview and what a wonderful show we've been able to put together for you today on the 51st State. I thank everyone for their participation, their involvement, and of course, if you see advantage in the advertisements that we played during the show, I encourage you to inspect those and see if you can improve your own life. Shaheen, thank you very much. And to Victor, who was on the show earlier, it's been a magnificent program, a long one, but a very, very special one indeed, as we look to change the world for the better for all of us. On that note, we will conclude tonight's show, and I'll see you next time here on the 51st State and ANR.news. Thank you. Good night.